Thank you all for coming out today. It's really wonderful to see so many people here to celebrate Richard Wilbur's poetry and his life at Amherst. He was a poet beloved here at Amherst over many, many years, many decades, and he really loved the college. He really is a part of who we are, and as a celebrated poet, an amazing poet and community member, I'm very happy to have you here at Chi. I want to thank the English department, in particular Karen Sanchez Eppler, and our ADC, Heather Grimes, and your person who helped us, Cassandra Hadrill. Thank you, Cassandra, who have all put in an enormous amount of effort to bring this day together and to put on a beautiful program for you. It's funny, having just had the JFK celebration here, I walk in the mornings and I see that banner that says, "Where power corrupts, poetry cleanses." And I walked past that yesterday and I thought, I don't know, you know. Plato would not have agreed. He would have booted the poets from the Republic. And yet there is something about this particular moment, I think, that at least has brought me to poetry again. Maybe it's the roiling politics of the day. But it is a place that generates complicated thought in a way that is not about external stimulus and provocation of the sorts that are so irritating and enervating at the same time. Thinking about poetry, reading Richard Wilbur, made me think about the last lines of W.H. Auden's poem, September 1st, 1939, where he writes, "May I, composed like them of Eros and of dust, beleaguered by the same negation and despair, show an affirming flame." And it's that affirming flame that I think I feel when I read poetry, and in particular Richard Wilbur's poetry. We live in a place, we work in a place, we walk where he walked, we sit where he sat, we see what he saw, but as a poet he transformed the world we live in ways that are wondrous. And I'm really looking forward to hearing his words and talking about his life with you today. So thank you very much. And Karen, would you come on up?
So I'm Karen Sanchez Eppler, chair of the English department at Amherst, and just so glad to have this full room and this sense of hallowedness. We gather here today in that aura of poetic inheritance, on Nonotuck land rife with story, in a college founded in good part by Noah Webster and the Dickinson family, in a library named in honor of Robert Frost, who taught here, to honor Richard Wilbur, twice winner of the Pulitzer Prize, poet laureate of the United States, and both a student and a teacher at this college. When Richard Wilbur's death on October 14th of 2017, just this month, last month, the English department gathered and wondered what we might do to mark this loss and to celebrate Richard Wilbur's life and poetry. We knew it should be simple, intimate, full of joy, not so much performance as gathering, and decided that there's never anything better to do than to read the poems and to depend on their generous, humane assurance that pattern and shape, the beautiful, the splendor of mere being, will steer us through all kinds of fear and loss. And I think you'll hear that over and over again today in the poems that we're going to read with you. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to read poems. People reading poems may need to say a little bit about their relationships with Wilbur or their relations with the poem that they're reading, but not too much, because we're going to read lots of poems. And afterwards, there will be food and drink. No yams and succotash, but other good things. And in the background, you'll hear recordings of settings of Wilbur's poems. The music that will play during the refreshments, some are sung by the Amherst College Chorus and some by the Da Camera Singers. music by Eric Sawyer, by Greg Brown, two Amorous names, and by Hub DeLange and John Corliano, as well as pieces from Leonard Bernstein's operetta Candide, for which, of course, Richard Wilbur wrote the lyrics. But we thought that we would begin today's reading by letting Mr. Wilbur himself read first.
Richard Wilbur is a two-time Pulitzer Prize-winning poet, a poet laureate, a translator, a master of rhyme, rhythm, meter, widely recognized as one of the country's great poets. He is also an Amherst graduate and has, for many years, been an Amherst teacher. I want to thank him for agreeing to read today. Poetry is one of those tools, one of those generative objects of which we make much too little use. He has chosen to read Seed Leaves.
When Buddy invited me to read a poem here, are you hearing me, by the way? Good. My colleague and tennis partner, David Sofield, suggested an early poem of mine called Seed Leaves, and that was a good idea. It's a good little poem and it's short. Way back there when I wrote this poem, I dedicated it to Robert Frost because we shared a delight in the things of this season, especially in gardens and gardening. But I'm going to rededicate this poem right now. I dedicate it to the graduating class at Amherst and wish them every good thing. Seed leaves. Here something stubborn comes, dislodging the earth crumbs and making crusty rubble. It comes up bending double and looks like a green staple. It could be seedling maple or artichoke or bean. That remains to be seen. Forced to make choice of ends, the stalk in time unbends, shakes off the seed case, heaves aloft and spreads two leaves, which still display no sure and special signature. Toothless and fat, they keep the oval form of sleep. This plant would like to grow and yet be embryo, increase and yet escape the doom of taking shape, be vaguely vast and climb to the tip end of time with all of space to fill, like boundless Yggdrasil that had the stars for fruit. But something at the root, more urgent than that urge, bids two true leaves emerge. And now the plant, resigned to being self-defined before it can commerce with the great universe, takes aim at all the sky and starts to ramify.
Take that, Plato. Karen has asked me to say a word about Richard Wilbur, the Amherst College teacher. There is, as always, a bit of backstory. As a student, Richard Wilbur began his first year at Amherst College in September 1938. He returned as a faculty member exactly 70 years later in September 2008, having accepted Tony Marks's offer that he become the Simpson Lecturer. Of course, Dick remembered that Robert Frost had been appointed to this distinguished position in order to entice him back to the college in 1948. Frost had resigned his faculty position shortly after his wife died 10 years earlier. He moved to Cambridge, where 8 years later he met Dick Wilbur, a veteran of the Second World War who had enrolled as a graduate student at Harvard. They became friends, poet friends, notwithstanding that Dick was 47 years Frost's junior. This brief history is apropos because, whereas Frost fulfilled his duties as Simpson Lecturer by coming to the college a couple of times each academic year to read his poems before large audiences in Johnson Chapel and to hold forth to the fraternity lads after dinner, Dick thought that he should do more than that, so he determined to teach regular courses each semester. He must have asked Marks if I might teach with him. The email message I soon got from the president expressed emphatically his wish that I agree to take this on. No arm twisting was necessary. That fall, Dick and I, we had become friends more than 20 years earlier, began 7 years of co-teaching, years in which I learned no little about how to read a poem aloud, and then how to talk about it with the very good students who seemed always to sign up for our courses. I treasure the memories. What was Dick like in the classroom? As Bob and Mary Bagg tell us in their indispensable biography of Dick, he thought of himself as a teacher who, and I quote the Baggs quoting him, said the following: "I always made an anxious business of teaching, over-prepared all my classes, and sought to seem omniscient," end quote. When it came to poetry, how it is made, what it is for, to be of use, he invariably said. He in fact was as close to being omniscient as it is given to mortals to be. And at Amherst anyway, he did not make an anxious business of teaching. The Baggs' judgment, and again I quote, is that we taught with great ease. Great may be a pardonable exaggeration, but the large number of messages and letters that have come my way in the last few days testify to how warm and lively Dick was in the classroom. The only even semi-serious anxiety I noticed occurred when, early in that first semester, he forgot his key to our office. He put that to rest by wearing the same gray tweed sport coat for every subsequent class for 7 years. He simply left the key in the right-hand pocket. Except the fluster of lost door keys, Elizabeth Bishop amusingly says in One Art. I'd rather not, Dick replied. Despite Dick's slightly grumpy impatience with slant rhyme, which we amateurs occasionally resort to, many of our students have written me in the last 2 weeks. I will quote but 2 representative remarks. In the first, Ambika Kamath, class of 13, a brilliant student of biology, states, I'm quoting her, "I'm in South Africa doing field work at the moment, and I'm going to seek out a peaceful spot and read aloud my favorite Wilbur poems into the ether. His grace and sense of fun, both so palpable in his poetry, will always be an inspiration," end quote. The second writer is Roger Creel, 11, a dancer and choreographer soon on his way to graduate school in geology. Quote, "A spark has left the world with Dick Wilbur gone, a peat fire that burned long, gave forth continuous heat, and filled the air with comfort. He would have wanted us to remain joyful, but a leaden feeling persists," end quote. Dick would have applauded the metaphor. And here is a poem, Hamlin Brook, that to my mind is Richard Wilbur at his very best. It contains the virtues of his early and late work. On the one hand, the virtuosic sentence and image making that, seemingly effortlessly, Dick deploys in the most traditional of stanzas, the quatrain, and on the other, a description of a mere inchling trout, a creature that, because Dick follows its rapid movements with such wondrous affirmation, seems to represent all the goodness of creation. Appropriately, given the epiphanal nature of this encounter, there's not a slant rhyme in sight. One further note, the backstory to Hamlin Brook has to be Frost's poem in hendecasyllabics, for once, then something. Your homework assignment tonight is to read more than once the 2 poems back to back. Hamlin Brook. It's on the Wilbur property in Cummington. At the alder-darkened brink where the stream slows to a lucid jet, I lean to the water, dinting its top with sweat, and see, before I can drink, a startled inchling trout of spotted near transparency, trawling a shadow solider than he. He swerves now, darting out to where, in a flick slew of sparks and glittering silt, he weaves through streambed rocks, disturbing foundered leaves, and butts then out of view beneath a sliding glass, crazed by the skimming of a brace of burnished dragonflies across its face, in which deep cloudlets pass, and a white precipice of mirrored birch trees plunges down toward where the azures of the zenith drown. How shall I drink all this? Joy's trick is to supply dry lips with what can cool and slake, leaving them dumbstruck also with an ache nothing can satisfy. I once asked Dick about that unspecified ache, wondering if it acknowledged a desire that such an experience as the poem enacts might last forever. Truly wise man that he was, he simply smiled.
I'm going to read The Beautiful Changes, the title poem of Wilbur's first collection, and also a poem written about other kinds of changes, but that fits well to the ways that we carry the change that is death. The Beautiful Changes. One waiting a fall meadow finds on all sides the Queen Anne's lace lying like lilies on water. It glides so from the walker, it turns dry grass to a lake as the slightest shade of you valleys my mind in fabulous blue lucernes. The beautiful changes as a forest is changed, by a chameleon's tuning his skin to it, as a mantis arranged on a green leaf grows into it, makes the leaf leafier, and proves any greenness is deeper than anyone knows. Your hands hold roses always in a way that says they are not only yours. The beautiful changes in such kind ways, wishing ever to sunder things and things' selves for a second finding, to lose for a moment all that it touches back to wonder.
I'm going to read a poem called Praise in Summer. Comes right before The Beautiful Changes in the same volume as the poem Karen read. And it's a poem that is, in a sense, about beautiful changes, but also as it makes its own changes, it kids itself. And that's one of the things that I love about it. You'll hear that it's a sonnet. And if you listen carefully, you'll also see that it's a sonnet that both rigorously observes the sonnet's conventions of rhyme, and at the same time violates the conventions of octave and sestet in an exceedingly productive way. It's a poem, among other things, about poetry. Obscurely, yet most surely call to praise, as sometimes summer calls us all, I said the hills are heavens full of branching ways where star-nosed moles fly overhead the dead. I said the trees are mines in air. I said, see how the sparrow burrows in the sky. And then I wondered why this mad instead perverts our praise to uncreation. Why such savors in this wrenching things awry? Does sense so stale that it must needs derange the world to know it? To a praiseful eye, should it not be enough of fresh and strange that trees grow green, and moles can course in clay, and sparrows sweep the ceiling of our day?
I'm Biddy Martin. I feel so lucky to have had the opportunity to get to know Richard Wilbur. I will never forget the honor he did by reading at my inauguration. I believe the idea was David Sofield's. At commencement, that he allowed us to honor him with a portrait at the front of John Sir Chapel, that we were able to celebrate his 90th birthday in the way we did. I feel lucky to be part of a community that would gather in honor of him to read poetry. I'm going to read in the elegy season. Perhaps, among other things, it's a bit of a lesson that he teaches us about what the spirit, the mind, the heart can do in the face of loss or longing. Haze, char, and the weather of all souls. A giant absence mopes upon the trees. Leaves cast in casual potpourris whisper their scents from pits and cellar holes. Or brood in gullies, steeped in wells, they spend in chilly steam their last aromas, yield from shallow hells a revenance of field and orchard air. And now the envious mind, which could not hold the summer in my head, while bounded by that blazing circumstance, parades these barrens in a golden trance, remembering the wealthy season dead, and by an autumn inspiration makes a summer all its own. Green boughs arise through all the boundless backward of the eyes, and the soul bathes in warm conceptual lakes. Less proud than this, my body leans an ear past cold and colder weather, after wings' soft commotion, the sudden race of springs, the goddess tread heard on the dayward stair, longs for the brush of the freighted air, for smells of grass and cordial lilac, for the sight of green leaves building into the light, and azure water hoisting out of wells.
I'm Jane Wald with the Emily Dickinson Museum, and I have the honor to read Altitudes. This is a poem that Richard Wilbur read at the opening ceremony for the Emily Dickinson Museum in 2003, when the Homestead and the Evergreens came together, and then he read again 8 years later at Biddy Martin's inauguration. The first day was an extremely warm September afternoon, and the second, as I recall, was an extremely cold, blustery afternoon. The poem itself also is a little bit of a study in contrasts in different forms of spirituality, where it begins in the majestic loftiness of a European cathedral and then ends in kind of solitary reflection under Emily Dickinson's orchard dome. Look up into the dome. It is a great salon, a brilliant place, yet not too splendid for the race whom we imagine there, wholly at home with the gold rosetted white wainscot, the oval windows, and the faultless figures of the painted vault. Strolling, conversing in that precious light, They chat no doubt of love, the pleasant burden of their courtesy, borne down at times to you and me, where in this dark we stand and gaze above. For all they cannot share, all that the world cannot in fact afford, their lofty premises are floored with the massed voices of continual prayer. How far it is from here to Emily Dickinson's father's house in America. Think of her climbing a spiral stair up to the little cupola with its clear, small panes, its room for one. Like the dark house below, so full of eyes in mirrors and of shut-in flies, this chamber furnished only with the sun is she and she alone, a mood to which she rises, in which she sees bird choristers in all the trees, and a wild shining of the pure unknown on Amherst. This is caught in the dormers of a neighbor who, no doubt, will before long be coming out to pace about his garden, lost in thought.
Hello, my name's Amelia Worsley. I'm going to be reading a poem called Love Calls Us to the Things of This World. I chose it because I was actually teaching it to a freshman seminar class this time last year, and I hope to be teaching it for many years to come. So I read that the provocation for this poem was a moment when Wilbur was staying in an apartment in Italy and saw laundry whizzing past his window. It's a very philosophical poem with references to Aristotle and to the Gospel of St. John, but I think characteristically with a lot of self-deprecation and humor. When he was interviewed about this poem in a video you can see online if you Google it, he said that the thing he was proudest of was that he used the word hunks. So listen out for that near the end. Okay. Love calls us to the things of this world. The eyes open to a cry of pulleys, and, spirited from sleep, the astounded soul hangs for a moment, bodiless and simple as false dawn. Outside the open window, the morning air is all awash with angels. Some are in bed sheets, some are in blouses, some are in smocks, but truly, there they are. Now they are rising together in calm swells of halcyon feeling, filling whatever they wear with the deep joy of their impersonal breathing. Now they are flying in place, conveying the terrible speed of their omnipresence, moving and staying like white water. And now, of a sudden, they swoon down into so rapt a quiet that nobody seems to be there. The soul shrinks from all that it is about to remember, from the punctual rape of every blessed day, and cries, "Oh, let there be nothing on earth but laundry, nothing but rosy hands in the rising steam, and clear dances done in the sight of heaven." Yet, as the sun acknowledges with a warm look the world's hunks and colours, the soul descends once more in bitter love to accept the waking body, saying now in a changed voice as the man yawns and rises, "Bring them down from their ruddy gallows. Let there be clean linen for the backs of thieves. Let lovers go fresh and sweet to be undone, and the heaviest nuns walk in a pure floating of dark habits, keeping their difficult balance."
I have chosen a small poem about the small years of large experience known as childhood. It's a small poem, but none of Wilbur's poems are slight. All are estimable. Boy at the window. Seeing the snowman standing all alone in dusk and cold is more than he can bear. The small boy weeps to hear the wind prepare a night of gnashings and enormous moan. His tearful sight can hardly reach to where the pale-faced figure with bitumen eyes returns him such a God-forsaken stare as outcast Adam gave to paradise. The man of snow is none the less content, having no wish to go inside and die. Still, he is moved to see the youngster cry. Though frozen water is his element, he melts enough to drop from one soft eye a trickle of the purest rain, a tear for the child at the bright pane, surrounded by such warmth, such light, such love, and so much fear.
As you've already heard and will keep hearing for the next minute, Dick Wilbur was a master of similes. Baby critics learn that similes have two parts, a tenor and a vehicle, but even grown-up critics can never remember which is which. This particular poem, An Event, a poem of the 50s, has a wonderful simile with, I think, 3 terms in it. It has a flock of birds, it has a fingerprint, and maybe a glass or 2 of red wine. I once told Dick, got up my courage to tell him that this was my favorite simile in all of poetry, not barring the Iliad. And he said, Tony Heck liked that one too. An event. As if a cast of grain leapt back to the hand, a landscape full of small black birds intent on the far south convene at some command, at once in the middle of the air, at once are gone, with headlong and unanimous consent from the pale trees and fields they settled on. What is an individual thing? They roll like a drunken fingerprint across the sky. Or so I give their image to my soul until, as if refusing to be caught in any singular vision of my eye or in the nets and cages of my thought, they tower up, shatter, and madden space with their divergences, are each alone swallowed from sight, and leave me in this place, shaping these images to make them stay. Meanwhile, in some formation of their own, they fly me still and steal my thoughts away. Delighted with myself and with the birds, I set them down and give them leave to be. It is by words and the defeat of words, down sudden vistas of the vain attempt, that for a flying moment one may see by what cross purposes the world is dreamt.
The poem I'm going to read, Advice to a Prophet, needs a little backstory to it. The Germans surrendered on May 8th. Wilbur did not return to America for 6 months. Why was this? Well, he wrote a column for his division newspaper, and in this division newspaper, he remarked that an officer of his acquaintance wore riding boots, carried a riding crop, and had pearl-handled revolvers
strapped to his waist. In the absence, Wilbur wrote, of either horses or enemies. So who knows? That might have been part of the reason why he was kept so long in Europe. The other circumstance to this poem, Advice to a Prophet, is that it's a poem that he took 19 years to write. He was in a bar, and one of the people there knew that he was a poet, and he said, you know, this was after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, why don't you write a poem about the significance of the A-bomb? And Wilbur accepted the challenge. If he could do it, he would get $10 from the person who was making the bet. But that didn't happen right away. Finally, he was able to write this poem. And if you look carefully at the poem, there is an undertone to it. He's not simply writing to someone who is trying to explain the horrors of an exchange of atomic bombs, but he's writing to himself as the prophet who was giving this warning. When you come, as you must, to the streets of our city, mad-eyed from stating the obvious, not proclaiming our fall, but begging us in God's name to have self-pity, spare us all word of the weapons, their force and range, the long numbers that rocket the mind. Our slow, unreckoning hearts will be left behind, unable to fear what is too strange. Nor shall you scare us with talk of the death of the race. How could we dream of this place without us? The sun mere fire, the leaves untroubled about us, a stone look on the stone's face. Speak of the world's own change. Though we cannot conceive of an undreamt thing, we know to our cost how the dreamt cloud crumbles, the vines are blackened by frost, how the view alters. We could believe, if you told us so, that the white-tailed deer will slip into perfect shade, grown perfectly shy. The lark avoid the reaches of our eye, the jackpine lose its knuckled grip on the cold ledge, and every torrent burn as Xanthus once, its gliding trout stunned in a twinkling. What should we be without the dolphin's ark, the dove's return? These things in which we have seen ourselves and spoken, ask us, prophet, how we shall call our natures forth when that live tongue is all dispelled, that glass obscured or broken, in which we have said the rose of our love and the clean horse of our courage, in which beheld the singing locust of the soul unshelled, and all we mean or wish to mean. Ask us whether with the worldless rose our hearts shall fail us. Come demanding whether there shall be lofty or long-standing when the bronze annals of the oak tree close.
So if we ask, how did he write? We have the poems, we have the writings. If we ask how he taught, we have the testimonials. The next three presenters are going to give you an opportunity to ask a very difficult question to answer. How did he read? How did Richard Wilbur read? We don't really ask ourselves that question very often. The traces that literary critics leave of how they read are really very hard to swallow. But the translator first reads, and then voices. And in the reading, hears voices, and then voices, and writes. How did Richard Wilbur read? How did he read Jorge Guillén, the Spanish poet of life and affirmation? Muerte a lo lejos. Alguna vez me angustia una certeza y ante mí se estremece mi futuro. Acechándolo está de pronto un muro del arrabal final en que tropieza la luz del campo. Mas ¿habrá tristeza si la desnuda el sol? No, no hay apuro todavía. Lo urgente es el maduro fruto y la mano ya lo descorteza. Y un día, entre los días el más triste será, tenderse deberá la mano sin afán y acatando el inminente poder, diré sin lágrimas, en vista de justa fatalidad, el murocano va a imponerme su ley, no su accidente. Death from a distance. When that certainty appalls my thought, my future trembles on the road ahead. There, where the light of the country field is caught in the blind final precinct of the dead, a wall takes aim. But what is sad, stripped bare by the sun's gaze? It does not matter now. Not yet. What matters is the ripened pear that even now my hand strips from the bough. And the time will come, and my hand will reach someday without desire. That saddest day of all, I shall not weep, but with a proper awe for the great force impending, I shall say, lay on, just destiny. Let the white wall impose on me its uncapricious law.
Translation, especially poetic translation, is not for those weak in words. It is, let's say it straight out, a violation. And if that violation is to become a creation, the translator must be at once modest before his subject, yet bold. Richard Wilbur was modest and bold. Too modest, some said, not bold enough for others. But in his courageous translations of some of France's most complex, yet still accessible poems, from François Villon to Baudelaire, he succeeded in bringing his confrères to the thirsty attention of those who both loved the French language and those who were not fortunate enough to read or speak it. He wrote at one point, one thing in his typical modesty, one thing that moves a poet to translate from other tongues, as I know from my own experience, is the urge to broaden his utterance through imposture, to say things he is not yet able to say in his own person. One of his most marvelous translations, one of my favorite poems, a poem, in fact, that I read at his class's 50th reunion in 1992. He came up to me afterward and said, "So you liked that, did you?" Is a poem, a sonnet by Joachim du Bellay, a Renaissance writer who was living in Rome at the time that he wrote it. Though its first word is happy, both in the translation and the original, it is a poem of regret and loneliness, one that names the aches brought on by nostalgia. Yet it most eminently sings of the power of the imagination to attenuate these anxieties. In French first. Heureux qui, comme Ulysse, a fait un beau voyage, ou comme celui-là qui conquit la toison, et puis est retourné, plein d'usage et raison, vivre entre ses parents le reste de son âge. Quand reverrai-je, hélas, de mon petit village fumer la cheminée? Et en quelle saison reverrai-je le clos de ma pauvre maison, qui m'est une province et beaucoup d'avantages? Plus me plaît le séjour qu'ont bâti mes aïeux que des palais romains, le front audacieux. Plus que le marbre dur me plaît l'ardoise fine, plus mon Loire gaulois que le Tibre latin, plus mon petit Liré que le mont Palatin, et plus que l'air marin, la douceur angevine. Happy the man. Happy the man who, journeying far and wide as Jason or Ulysses did, can then turn homeward, seasoned in the ways of men, and claim his own, and there in peace abide. When shall I see the chimney smoke divide the sky above my little town? Oh, when stroll the small gardens of that house again, which is my realm and crown, and more beside? Better I love the plain, secluded home my fathers built, than bold facades of Rome. Slate pleases me as marble cannot do. better than Tiber's flood, my quiet Loire, those little hills, the knees, and dearer far than great sea winds, the zephyrs of Anjou.
I'm honored to read Mr. Wilbur's translation of a poem by the Russian poet Anna Akhmatova. The poem is Lot's Wife. I think you know the story. Лотова жена. И праведник шел за посланником Бога, огромный и светлый по черной горе. Но громко жене говорила тревога: не поздно, ты можешь еще посмотреть на красные башни родного Содома, на площадь, где пела, на двор, где прила, на окна пустые, высокие дома, где милому мужу детей родила. Взглянула, и скованной смертной болью глаза ее больше смотреть не могли. И сделалось тело прозрачной солью, и быстрые ноги к земле приросли. Кто женщину эту оплакивать будет? Не меньше ли мнится она из утрат? Лишь сердце мое никогда не забудет отдавшую жизнь за единственный взгляд. Lot's wife. The just man followed then his angel guide, where he strode on the black highway, hulking and bright. But a wild grief in his wife's bosom cried, look back, it is not too late for a last sight of the red towers of your native Sodom, the square where you once sang, the gardens you shall mourn, and the tall house with empty windows where you loved your husband and your babes were born. She turned, and looking on the bitter view, her eyes were welded shut by mortal pain. Into transparent salt her body grew, and her quick feet were rooted in the plain. Who would waste tears upon her? Is she not the least of our losses, this unhappy wife? Yet in my heart she will not be forgot, who for a single glance gave up her life.
From an unhappy wife to a brilliantly happy wife, a late Obad for his wife, Charlie. You could be sitting now in a carol, turning some liver-spotted page, or rising in an elevator cage toward ladies' apparel. You could be planting a raucous bed of salvia in rubber gloves, or lunching through a screed of someone's loves with pitying head, or making some unhappy setter heel, or listening to a bleak lecture on Schoenberg's serial technique. Isn't this better? Think of all the time you are not wasting and would not care to waste, Such things, thank God, not being to your taste. Think what a lot of time by woman's reckoning you've saved and so may spend on this. You who would rather lie in bed and kiss than anything. It's almost noon, you say? If so, time flies, and I need not rehearse the rosebud's theme of centuries of verse. If you must go, wait for a while, then slip downstairs and bring us up some chilled white wine and some blue cheese and crackers and some fine, ruddy-skinned pears.
I didn't know when I chose this poem, The Prisoner of Zenda, that I could introduce it by saying, if you wonder what Dick did when Charlie was away, this is what he did. He watched late night movies. And the first time I heard him read this poem, I believe it was at a very formal occasion. I think it might have been in New York City. And I had never actually read it before. And so to hear him read it for the first time brought the humor and the grace that other people have talked about. He introduced the poem always, as he does on the Web of Stories when he reads it, by saying that he'd fallen asleep in front of the TV, and one movie led to the next, and he woke up a little groggy and just kind of jotted this down. At the end of The Prisoner of Zenda, the king being out of danger, Stuart Granger, as Rudolph Rassendyll, must swallow a bitter pill by renouncing his co-star, Deborah Kerr. It would be in poor behavior in him and in Princess Flavia were they to put their own concerns before those of the throne. Deborah Kerr must wed the king instead. Rassendyll turns to go. Must it be so? Why can't they have their cake and eat it, for heaven's sake? Please let them have it both ways, the audience prays. And yet it is hard to quarrel with a plot so moral. One redeeming factor, however, is that the actor who plays the once dissolute king, who has learned through suffering not to drink or be mean to his future queen, far from being a stranger, is also Stuart Granger.
I am reading a poem called The Raider. And I have written probably 100 million pages about raising children, but I really just wanted to say this. So here's everything I ever tried to say in one poem. In her room at the prow of the house where light breaks and the windows are tossed with linden, my daughter is writing a story. I pause in the stairwell, hearing from her shut door a commotion of typewriter keys, like a chain hauled over a gunwale. Young as she is, the stuff of her life is a great cargo and some of it heavy. I wish her a lucky passage. But now it is she who pauses, as if to reject my thought and its easy figure. A stillness greatens, in which the whole house seems to be thinking. And then she is at it again with a bunched clamor of strokes and again is silent. I remember the dazed starling which was trapped in that very room 2 years ago, how we stole in, lifted a sash, and retreated not to affright it. And how for a helpless hour, through the crack in the door, we watched this sleek, wild, dark, and iridescent creature batter against the brilliance, drop like a glove to the hard floor or the desktop, and wait then, humped and bloody, for the wits to try it again. And how our spirits rose when suddenly sure it lifted off from a chair back, beating a smooth course for the right window and clearing the sill of the world. It is always a matter, my darling, of life or death, as I had forgotten. I wish what I wished you before, but harder.
Program says, I'm Bill Pritchard. I'm more familiarly known as William H. Pritchard. Dick Wilbur and I were never close, but I think we approved of each other's writing, and our relations were cordial. I want to read a short poem, a short late poem, the opening poem of his 1987 collected poems called The Ride. And then I want to make a brief remark about it and then read it again. The Ride. The horse beneath me seemed to know what course to steer, through the horror of snow I dreamed, and so I had no fear. Nor was I chilled to death by the wind's white shutters, thanks to the veils of his patient breath and the mist of sweat from his flanks. It seemed that all night through, within my hand no rein, and nothing in my view but the pillar of his mane, I rode with magic ease at a quick, unstumbling trot through shattering vacancies on into what was not, till the weave of the storm grew thin with the threading of cedar smoke, and the ice-blind pane of an inn shimmered, and I awoke. How shall I now get back to the inn-yard where he stands, burdened with every lack, and waken the stable hands to give him, before I think that there was no horse at all, some hay, some water to drink, a blanket, and a stall? No word has been said against Richard Wilbur today. A great critic from the last century named Hugh Kenner was not on Dick's wavelength at all. And in one of his books, he took the opportunity to mock a bit an early poem of Dick's called The Juggler, very elaborate and tricky, as a perfect teacher's poem, plenty for the teacher to say. Miss so-and-so, in the first stanza, do you note that metaphor? And so on, and then talk about the stanza form. And I thought the Ride was a good antidote to that, because unless I'm wrong, it doesn't really give teacher much to say. I might note that only one of the 28 final words in the lines are of one syllable, are of more than one, that only one of the 28 final words in the line are of one syllable. 2 syllables. That only one of the 28 final words in the lines are of 2 syllables. I think that eye reading too, if you had a text, might assist the ear a bit in registering how, as the ride progresses, the 3rd and 4th stanza, there's 7 stanzas, iambic trimeter, A, B, very straightforward. Between the 3rd and 4th stanzas, there are, a comma ends each one rather than a full stop. And that may be something that you need to have the eye as well as the ear to register. The Ride. The horse beneath me seemed to know what course to steer. Through the horror of snow I dreamed, and so I had no fear, nor was I chilled to death by the wind's white shutters, thanks to the veils of his patient breath in the mist of sweat from his flanks. It seemed that all night through, within my hand, no rain and nothing in my view but the pillar of his mane, I rode with magic ease at a quick, unstumbling trot through shattering vacancies on into what was not, till the weave of the storm grew thin, with a threading of cedar smoke, and the ice-blind pain of an inn shimmered, and I awoke. How shall I now get back to the inn yard where he stands, burdened with every lack, and waken the stable hands to give him, before I think that there was no horse at all, some hay, some water to drink, a blanket, and a stall?
I'm Bill Pritchard, or always wanted to be. I'm going to read the short poem that reminds us of not only what a devoted lover of the natural world Dick was, but an unsentimental one as well. A barred owl. The warping night air, having brought the boom of an owl's voice into her darkened room, we tell the wakened child that all she heard was an odd question from a forest bird, asking of us, if rightly listened to, who cooks for you? And then, who cooks for you? Words, which can make our terrors bravely clear, can also thus domesticate a fear and send a small child back to sleep at night, not listening for the sound of stealthy flight or dreaming of some small thing in a claw, borne up to some dark branch and eaten raw.
I was fortunate enough to have Richard Wilbur as a professor twice while I was at Amorous in my poetry courses, and I feel very lucky to have had that opportunity to study with him. I still have all of his handwritten encouraging notes on the drafts of my poems, and I picked this poem to read because it is in a form that has become my favorite form of verse since graduating from Amherst College. It is a rhyming stanzaic haiku poem, and as David Sofield and Daniel Hall know, I have attempted to imitate this form many times, and he makes it sound truly effortless. So I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. Zia. Once their fruit is picked, the corn stalks lighten, and though keeping to their strict rows, begin to be the tall grasses that they are, lissom now, and free as canes that clatter in island wind, or plumed reeds rocked by lake water. Soon, if not cut down, their ranks grow whistling dry and blanch to lightest brown, so that one day all their ribbon-like down-arcing leaves rise up and fall in tossed companies like goose wings beating southward over the changed trees. Later, there are days full of bare expectancy, downcast hues, and haze. Days of an utter calm, in which one white corn leaf, oddly aflutter, its fabric sheathing a gaunt stem, can seem to be the sole thing breathing.
I'm Jennifer Acker from the Common Literary Magazine, and I'm particularly grateful for Wilbur's early support for the magazine. And as you might imagine from his modesty, he was particularly fond of the title, The Common. I do want to point out also there is an essay, an early version from Bob and Mary's book about Wilbur called The Poet in Rome that appeared in the Common in issue 4 in 2012, and I think there are copies of it over here by the door, and that sort of digs into Wilbur's time in Rome and the poems that came out of that era. I'm going to read Mayflies, which was a favorite. There were several of us considering this poem, and I just appreciate its calm and its call to awe. Mayflies. In somber forest, when the sun was low, I saw from unseen pools a mist of flies in their quadrillions rise and animate a ragged patch of glow with sudden glittering, as when a crowd of stars appear through a brief gap in black and driven cloud, one arc of their great round dance showing clear. It was no muddled swarm I witnessed, for in entreshot each fluttering insect there rose 2 steep yards in air, then slowly floated down to climb once more, so that they all composed a manifold and figured scene, and seemed the weavers of some cloth of gold, or the fine pistons of some bright machine. Watching those lifelong dancers of the day as night closed in, I felt myself alone in a life too much my own, more mortal in my separateness than they, unless, I thought, I had been called to be not fly or star, but one whose task is joyfully to see how fair the fiats of the caller are.
This is a late poem by Richard Wilbur called The Reader, and I imagine his aspect as he's writing this poem, watching a young child read as a kind of metaphor for a kind gaze down at us, caught up in the wonder of imagination. The Reader. She is going back these days to the great stories that charmed her younger mind. A shaded light shines on the nape half shadowed by her curls, and a page turns now with a scuffing sound. Onward they come again, the orphans reaching for a first handhold in a stony world, the young provincials who at last look down on the city's maze and will descend into it, the serious girl, once more, who would live nobly, the sly one who aspires to marry so, the young man bent on glory, and that other who seeks a burden. Knowing, as she does, what will become of them in bloody field or Tuscan garden, it may be that at times she sees their first and final selves at once, as a god might to whom all time is now. Or, having lived so much herself, perhaps she meets them this time with a wiser eye, noting that Julian's calculating head is from the first too severed from his heart. But the true wonder of it is that she, for all that she may know of consequences, still turns enchanted to the next bright page like some Natasha in the ballroom door, caught in the flow of things wherever bound, the blind delight of being, ready still to enter life on life and see them through.
In Auden's elegy for William Butler Yeats, he describes the cold, dark day the poet died and says that by morning tongues, the death of the poet was kept from his poems. But I've noticed something like the opposite happening in Richard Wilbur's case. It seems to me that several of his poems have undergone slight changes in the aftermath of his death, as if in response to it. The transformation has been most obvious in an elegy for his wife, Charlie, called simply The House, where once the speaker sounded to me like a man half in love with easeful death, the voice has gone slightly remote and otherworldly. That is, in its eerie way, the poem now seems to elegize the two of them. The House. Sometimes, on waking, she would close her eyes for a last look at that white house she knew in sleep alone and held no title to, and had not entered yet for all her sighs. What did she tell me of that house of hers? White gatepost, terrace, fan light of the door, a widow's walk above the bouldered shore, salt winds that ruffled the surrounding firs. Is she now there, wherever there may be? Only a foolish man would hope to find that haven fashioned by her dreaming mind. Night after night, my love, I put to sea.
And now, as a way to celebrate the celebration, maybe, Dick will read a poem.
Watching a few minutes of the Academy Awards recently, and I noticed how hard it is for honorees simply to say thank you and let it go at that. I'm going to say that in a moment, after which I'll go back to my hick town in western Massachusetts. And here is a little poem spoken by me as a Cummington, Massachusetts hick. Out here. Strangers might wonder why that big snow shovel's leaning against the house in July. Has it some cryptic meaning? It means at least to say that here we needn't be neat about putting things away, as on some suburban street. What's more, by leaning there, the shovel seems to express, with its rough and ready air, a boast of ruggedness. If a stranger said in sport, "I see you're prepared for snow," our shovel might retort, "Out here, you never know." Well, thank you.